is there a definition of community immunity level? When do we know that a community immunity level has been reached?
So so the Department of Public Health and other experts have, depending on the disease and the vaccination. So, for example, measles, you need about approximately 92 to 95% immunization rates to basically contain an outbreak. That's what they're looking at.
Okay, and we don't have that?
We don't have that.
The statistics I looked at would indicate that we pretty much have.
No, we don't have that, and that's the problem. We have many schools that are nowhere near that, and in fact, as in the last measles outbreak, it was determined that basically that the measles had spread out from Disneyland through communities where basically the estimated immunization rates were somewhere between 50 to about 85%. So they're nowhere near the 92 to 95 that's necessary to contain the outbreak. And that's why it kept spreading. That's why it didn't stop.
But I know, but let me just follow up with Senator Hancock. So we're talking about community immunity. You say that we have statistics that define which school district, for instance, has that number, 55%, 92%, whatever it is. The state average is about 92, 95%. So my question to you, I guess, is why didn't you pinpoint the effort here to immunize those communities or make sure that there was programs, et cetera, to focus on those communities that were not living up to the standards, so to speak, and making it a blanket rule that everybody had to be, that you eliminated the personal belief exemption?
Sure. So some of the challenges are, first of all, we mainly check this at kindergarten entry and 7th grade, and while certainly most people tend to stay in the same school, I mean, people do move around, but there are concentrations that happen. I think it's also probably more difficult administratively to say, how would you do this? Would you say, okay, in this school district, we're going to impose this, we're not in that school district, however, if that drops, do you go back and find all the kids who had a PB and tell them now you can't stay in the school because our school district has now dropped? I think that administratively certainly would be very challenging to try to create separate rules in different school districts. I think that again, the purpose is to try to protect our general community.
I understand the purpose, and the public health purpose is very important, and I too believe in immunization. But I think the bigger question here is that the penalty for not immunizing their kids is that you have to have either homeschool or you take the kid out of public schools, and I don't think that's a solution to the problem. So, I mean, even it's in the, on page 6 of the analysis, the ACLU, the purpose of, it's a fundamental right under the California Constitution to have kids go to our schools or be able to go to our schools, and we do have rules about immunization. So, Dr. Pan, how do you justify the public purpose of public safety and the right for everyone to have access?
So right now, so first of all, some of the more legal issues, I was referring to Judiciary Committee for your direction. So, but let me just, first of all, I have to say that all children, there are children, like you've heard from Rhett, but there's other children as well who cannot be immunized, who are concerned about going to school, not because of their own choices, because someone else's choices.
Correct.
And so what about the rights of those families to bring their children to school without being at risk of potentially catching a serious disease? That's why we put requirements on schools regarding on students, because not only to protect themselves, but to be sure that they don't, whether intentionally or unintentionally, become a danger to other students. And that's why we do put requirements for that. We heard about the peanut analogy, right? You have a child who has a severe peanut allergy, and you suddenly tell everyone you can't bring peanut butter to school. And there's certainly, that's only one. There's many examples of that. In terms of, again, back to the public interest, just briefly, and we'll deal with this more detail in the Judiciary Committee. But the Supreme Court has ruled very clearly that this is within this is not a violation of the Constitution. It is clearly within the rights, the authority of the state to protect the public health, including requiring vaccinations for school. In fact, most recently, just actually, I think it's last year, maybe even just wrapped up this year, Phillips versus the city of New York. This has been tested, say very clearly that the city of New York, the school districts had the right to protect students at school through vaccination, and in fact deemed Chemsky who's dean of the School of Law, I think in Irvine, has stated that parents can never endanger their children, the other children. I mean, this is really what this is about. If it wasn't for the fact that we've had the luxury. We've had the luxury of having a sufficiently high immunization rate that people didn't want to get vaccinated. We weren't going to have outbreaks, but we're seeing outbreaks. I mean, and so last year we had 644 cases of measles in the United States, a record high from a low of about 47 in the country. And then we had Disneyland, the Disney outbreak, which spread and spread and spread. We are clearly at the point where our community immunity is dropping too low and children are at risk. And you have children who have conditions. They may have recovering from chemotherapy. They may be being treated for lupus. They may be many other conditions who cannot be immunized. And so if a child cannot be immunized, they depend on the rest of us to be immunized so that those diseases don't reach them. And that's why I believe that's why so many school districts, the School Board Association, the school employees, the PTA, they all are supporting this bill because they don't want to see that happen. That's very disruptive to our schools.
Okay, Senator Leyva?
Good morning, Dr. Pan. Before I'm not on. Good morning, Dr. Pan.
Good morning.
You were.
I was.
You
Am I
are.
still?
Yes, you are now.
Okay, sorry. Thank you for bringing this issue forward, but before I get to my questions and my concerns, I want to thank everyone who came out in support and in opposition. This is democracy in action, so thank you. This is what we're supposed to do. I have vaccinated my children. I feel very strongly about vaccinations. I think it's very important. However, I have a real concern about the education piece, and that's what we're here to contemplate today as part of the Education Committee. Homeschooling my children would not have been an option for my husband and I had we chose not to vaccinate our children. I was working, my husband was working, and I don't even know that I would have been the best person to homeschool my children. They would probably agree with that. They are college graduates, and that's because they had a great education. So I think we need to address that because my understanding also is if this bill passes and becomes a law, not only would parents who don't vaccinate their children have to homeschool them, they would not be able to get the curriculum from whatever school district it is. Is that not true?
So basically, it states very clearly that if you homeschool your child, then this would not apply. So just merely having access to curriculum would not be a barrier to homeschooling.
So I choose to, I have unvaccinated children. I choose to homeschool them. I could go to the school district and get the curriculum for my children?
I believe so, yes.
Okay,
I will, if there's, I'm not the, Senator Allen, do you want to address that question?
That's not how I read the bill.
Well, so school districts do have all sorts of independent study programs that they provide to parents and families. I think this is an issue, and I've been hearing lots of reports as I've been going back and forth between the two committees, that this is an issue that's come up. I think that's something we're going to have to work on with the Education Committee to try to craft a good solution with our friends from the school boards that will both address the sort of financial concerns for parents that you're talking about. The good news is there is some infrastructure already in place for this kind of thing. There's all sorts of students who are in all sorts of different alternative situations, whether it's a young artist or athlete right the way over to someone with all sorts of special needs. So I would ask my joint author that if this moves forward, we would work closely with the committee and the school administrators and school boards association to craft a solution that addresses this particular issue.
I think we have someone that maybe could shed some light on that regarding homeschool. Why don't you come and take a chair up here? Introduce yourself. He's,
Madam Chair, Nathan Pierce, Private Home Educators of California. We have been working with the author's office, Senator Allen's office, on some language regarding homeschooling, and I would have to tell you that most of the folks that I work with are continuing to oppose the bill. We are trying to come up with some wording that would be better than what's currently in the bill, but I have to tell you that most of the folks that I've interacted with on the homeschool end of things are still very opposed to the measure.
they would rather have their children continue with their public school.
Either that, or they are still concerned about this being a violation of parental rights, or for some other reasons, or they're concerned about a change in the future. So.
Okay, all right.
May I finish?
Sure.
Okay, I feel that we don't have a good answer for the education route. Did you?
No, it's okay. Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you, thank you. So that's a big concern for me, as well as not having a religious exemption in the bill. I think that is problematic as well. I would be willing to work if if this gets out of the committee. I'd be willing to work with you, but for the reasons I stated, I won't be able to support the bill today. But if it does get out of the committee and whatnot, I would be willing to work with you on this. I do believe in vaccines, but I just don't think this is the right way to get at it.
Okay. Any other, Senator Hancock, you want to come back?
I do have some additional questions. I think I really want to associate myself with Senator Levia's remarks that this has been a learning experience for all of us because we've really needed to dig into the issue. And I feel like I've learned a lot about it. I don't know that I've learned enough about it to feel comfortable voting for the bill today. I'm interested in the more medical information. I had always assumed that if my child, for instance, was immunized against measles, and that the reason I was doing the immunization was so that when they went to school, if there was somebody there with measles, they wouldn't catch it. So, and I get the community immunity levels that if they're reached, my child probably wouldn't get measles, even if there was a child whose parents had chosen not to immunize them and they had gotten the disease. My reading of the community immunity levels was that we're pretty much there in California, and that one of the reasons we might not be there in some places is because we count a child as unimmunized unless they are fully immunized
right.
for everything.
So-
Could you clarify that?
Yes, let me go ahead and clarify it. So first of all, if your child was immunized, depending on the vaccine, for example, measles, you would have to afford approximately 99% of protection. So, I mean, it's pretty good. So it's probably unlikely your child would catch that disease. The problem is there are children attending school who cannot be immunized. In fact, we've heard about people talk about medical exemptions. And in fact, in Health Committee, and I was disappointed to hear that the same things were repeated here that were clearly clarified in Health Committee, that if a licensed physician says that it's not safe for your child to get a vaccine or the vaccine would be ineffective, then they could write a medical exemption. There is no other restriction on the judgment of a licensed physician. So anyone who said that they have a licensed physician who told them they couldn't get immunized should be able to get a medical exemption. And then those children, because they're not immunized, require protection. Now, when you talk about, do you have children who may be partially immunized? They may have certain vaccines, they may not pick other vaccines. And again, the issue there is that if you have, for example, the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella, is the one that's gotten most of the news because, unfortunately, because of a debunked study, a fraudulent study that was created that said that MMR is associated with autism. And we know that from the research that repeated numerous studies, millions of children, that there's no relationship between the two, all right? But yet you still have people saying that my child is either vaccine damaged or I'm not going to immunize because of, and they may say, okay, I'm not going to give the MMR vaccine and I'll give the other ones. The problem is that the question is, are we at 95% for the MMR? You know, are we at the right level for these different vaccinations? In fact, part of my bill does ask that the school districts, that when you enroll in the school, that you're told the immunization rate, not an immunization rate that is across the board, because that's not meaningful. It's actually for each required vaccination, because that's what counts. And the reference rate in which the Department of Public Health has determined is necessary to contain an outbreak. So it's not the, and when we talk about immunization rate, we do need to talk about disease by disease, disease by disease and vaccination by vaccination. And that is what is most important, actually. So, I mean, shorthand-wise, we've been talking about vaccination rates, but you're right, it is about particular vaccines, and are they high enough to protect all the children in the school, including ones who cannot receive the vaccine. And those children should not be put in danger when they attend school. And that's the problem. So you put a bunch of children together in a school, then and their vaccination rate isn't high enough. If there's an exposure and it's not high enough to contain it, it will spread. And there will be children who will catch the disease, who can be either severely ill or disabled or even die from those diseases. And that's why we have vaccination laws. That's why we have one in California. Every state in the country actually has vaccine requirements, because we don't want to see that happen.
Senator Hancock?
Thank you. Just to get back to the two other concerns that I have. One is this bill would accept a home-based private school from the prohibition if all of the school's pupils are residents of the household or members of a single family. That seems to me to rule out a great deal of homeschooling. And I say this because although all my children and grandchildren were immunized, I do have some grandchildren who were homeschooled. Now, many homeschooling parents combine their efforts and will, for instance, have a place you can go to take a physics class or something where the home isn't really an appropriate place to do that kind of learning. They would obviously fall under this rubric. Or even if two families got together to learn French or something, they would come under the rubric. I don't understand why that's in there, and I don't understand even why you want to categorically exclude all private schools from this. There may be a compelling interest in a public school, but
Well, Senator, that one thing, let me clarify, because I actually had that first.
Excuse me, through the chair, sir. Thank you.
Senator, let me have the opportunity.
Thank you.
To clarify, so I actually had that very same concern. What I learned was that folks have the right to apply to homeschool, but then that doesn't stop them within their own families, but that doesn't stop them from then having shared learning experiences with other students from other homeschools, in other words, other families. And I know we've got some folks here from the homeschool community who can maybe clarify that if they like to, but this does not stop two different families who are technically in two separate homeschools from working together to homeschool together.
it says are residents of the household or are members of a single family.
That's correct. So they have their own registered home school, but they'll still come together and study together. This happens all the time in the homeschool community.
To me, it makes sense. What you said makes sense.
But it's not in the law.
I don't believe
Right, it's not written in the law.
Well, certainly, I think first of all, we can clarify that. But the other issue is that I think if there's sort of interactions that are, I think, intermittent, that's fine. If you start again, bring a whole clump of children together, I mean, this is back to the public health reason for doing the bill. When you have a whole bunch of children together who are continuously together, and there's a low vaccination rate, that's when you're at risk of an outbreak. And then those children not only, of course, stay in school, they go home, they go shopping, they get taken to different places, and then you have an outbreak spreading through the community.
So with that logic, I don't see the exemption to homeschooling being an advantage to
Well,
the public health.
It is an advantage because it decreases the opportunity for the spread because you don't have the group in frequent contact exposure. So as I said, intermittent, it's a level of risk, right? Intermittent's probably much lower if they're continuously together. And that's part of the challenge is that essentially if the homeschool becomes a homeschool of, 100 families that are all together, we're back in the same situation we were before. But having families, even several families who, let's say, get together for a field trip, that's a much lower risk. I think the issue is that this is, again, about protecting public safety and preventing outbreaks from happening and minimizing the risk of that.
Okay.
I do have another question.
Sure.
I think that language is a problem for me, and I don't see any inclination to change it or do an amendment, so I will probably join Senator Levy and not be able to support the bill today, but I do have an additional concern, should the bill get out, that, and that is number 11, well, it's on page 3 of the bill, and it lists all the different immunizations that would be required. There are 10 of them. And then it says, any other disease deemed appropriate by the department, taking into consideration the recommendations of all these groups. And I appreciate that, but I really think adding it diseases when there's this level of questioning really ought to be done by the legislature or not just a blanket permission to add. And one of the reasons I say that was that there was a bill a couple of years ago to inoculate all prepubescent girls with an immunization against, I don't know if it was HIV or sexually transmitted, whatever. HPV, thank you, Senator Huff. And after a lot of discussion, the legislature decided not to do that. I'm sure that there'll be many new vaccines developed over time, and I'm not comfortable with that lack of scrutiny.
Okay, Senator Huff, and then Senator Block.